Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on The Steady Coach. And it is my great privilege today to bring you my conversation with Dr. Jeremy Pollack. Now, Dr. Pollack first reached out to me last year because he himself was suffering from 3PD. So in the first part of this interview, he's going to share his own journey with chronic dizziness, how he resolved it using the techniques we talk about here on my channel, and how he's doing today. But it also happens that Dr. Pollack is a renowned expert in the area of conflict resolution. And he's also here to share with you some of his vast expertise in this area, specifically talking about work stress, but also relating to any kind of interpersonal conflict. Now, just to give you an idea of some of the experience and expertise Dr. Pollack has, he has a PhD in psychology from Grand Canyon University. He's an adjunct professor of psychology at Arizona College. And throughout his career, he has done research on interpersonal conflict as well as intergroup conflict and social psychology. He is certified organizational development coach and also a certified clinical trauma specialist. He has written a book on conflict resolution called The Conflict Resolution Handbook, and he is currently the CEO and founder of Pollack Peace Building Systems, which is an organization that goes into companies and helps them resolve conflicts, as we're going to talk about later in this interview. And he is also the president of the Florida chapter of the Association for Conflict Resolution. So he is really an expert on this topic, and I'm so excited to bring you, again, some of the actionable tools we talk about in this interview to help you address some of the conflicts in your life that are leading to some of this stress and nervous system hypervigilance that is causing your symptoms. So if you have any questions, comments, please drop them below. And if you enjoyed this interview, please like, please share, and please subscribe to my channel. Enjoy. Okay, Jeremy, welcome. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So excited to hear because we have a lot to unpack today. And I was hoping you could start just by telling us a little bit about yourself for those in the audience who don't know who you are.
Sure. Well, professionally, I guess, is a good way to start.
Yeah. And
okay.
then we'll get it more into the personal stuff.
Okay,
too.
Sounds good. Yeah. No, I run a consulting firm. We do conflict management in the workplace. So we do all kinds of trainings, conflict interventions, that sort of thing. I have a master's degree in anthropology and a master's degree in conflict resolution and peace building and a doctorate in psychology with a focus in social psychology. So I'm what people may call a peace psychologist. Peace psychology is kind of a newer version of psychology. Our division in the American Psychological Association launched, I think, 30 years ago. So it's APA Division 48, peace psychology. So so it's a sort of narrow focus in social psychology. And that's where my head has been is trying to help people find ways out of conflict with each other or using conflict as an opportunity and finding ways to be at peace with each other and within themselves, because peace, typically starts at an internal level. So that's kind of where my focus has been for the last decade, is just helping folks get along better, get along with themselves better, lead more fulfilling lives through peace and conflict psychology, and have better relationships.
Oh, on a very selfish level, I'm so excited to talk to you about this. I don't know who can't use a little more inner peace and then also learn how to resolve conflicts more easily.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned in our correspondence before we started talking today, one of the most obvious patterns that I see among people who are watching my channel, who are dealing with chronic dizziness issues, is a strong pattern of conflict avoidance. And so I'm really hoping we can dig into that in a lot of depth today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting correlation. I'd be interested to see if there should be some studies around it.
There should be.
Yeah.
And, I think for some areas, I think in chronic pain, there really may be. It's just, as you know, the research on chronic dizziness specifically is behind the research in chronic pain.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll be talking more about that. But what's so interesting is that with this background, you found yourself in a totally different area, more recently.
Yeah.
In the context of actually being a patient or a sufferer yourself. So maybe you could tell us more about kind of that more personal side of things.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, and I'll start a little bit from the beginning, because after watching your channel a lot and diving into some of what you talk about, I recognized all kinds of patterns in my life. So chronically throughout my life, I've had stomach issues. Okay. So that's number one, chronic. No, every doctor, every test in the book, no one finds anything wrong ever with anything physical. So it must be, you know, emotional, mental. And so I remember reading John Sarno's book because I was trying to apply it to stomach issues and stuff like that. And it really made a lot of sense to me. This was maybe a decade ago, made a lot of sense to me, but I you know, didn't really change anything. So, you know, fast forward to a year ago, I think it was actually a little bit less than a year. I think it was April or May of 2022. I had been a year ago, January, February, I started experiencing back pain out of the blue, just start back pain. What the heck? Like I don't ever really experience back pain. Started getting worse and worse. My muscles getting tight. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Correlating this entire period of time with me trying to buy my first home. Okay. And going through a home mortgage process. And in addition, my company's growing and I'm working a lot and I'm trying to figure out how to finance the company and finance the home purchase, and a lot of pressure financially, professionally with my home, getting to the point where I started working more and more, like working, you know, 12, 14-hour days, 15-hour days. Like I got to the point in May where I was so stressed out and I was working till like 10 o'clock at night, like on my computer. And I remember thinking this when I went to sleep that night, the mortgage, there's some issues getting the mortgage done or whatever. And my brain's going, what if this doesn't work? Where are my wife and I going to live? Like, you know, and I'm putting my whole, it's like the stakes are high kind of thing, you know, and I'm working hard. And I remember going to sleep that night thinking to myself, I'm going to do something bad to myself if I don't stop with this, because I feel so stressed out right now. I should not be doing this to myself. I remember thinking that night. I wake up at 3 a.m. with the room just spinning, and I wake up and I'm able to, in hindsight, talk about this more intelligently because of everything I've learned since then. But while this is happening, I have a full-on panic attack because I have no idea. I've never experienced dizziness before. So I had no idea what was going on. I thought, what am I having, an aneurysm or something? I have a full-on panic attack. And this panic attack, like I've had maybe one panic attack in my life or something, like, or anxiety attack, right? This lasted for almost a whole day. It was like a 20-hour long panic attack because I didn't know what was going on. And so I finally was able to get to my physical therapist, talk to him about it. He gave me a few of those kind of the dizziness tests, you know, like going backwards, whatever. I triggered those tests. Yes, you have BPPD or whatever. He gave me some of the maneuvers. We did the maneuvers. And I would say within 24 hours, the spinning dizziness was gone. Yeah. But that then launched me into a probably 7 or 8 month saga with it went from motion sickness feeling and nausea to out of body experience. Like it wasn't like a dizziness anymore. It wasn't like the room spinning anymore. It was just like I got off a boat after moving for 12 hours on a boat and got off and I'm still moving and it's feeling weird. Right. And it's all correlated with a bunch of anxiety. And so that's months and months of that going on. So after about, you know, the first 4 weeks of feeling really off after that first dizziness period, again, the room's not spinning anymore, but I feel super off. I'm nauseous all the time. I found your YouTube video. I started diving into that and going, what is going on? And then I got super into the pain management area. And I was like really interested in how the nervous system works within, you know, in terms of anxiety and then physical symptoms. And I started noticing like all kinds of stuff that I hadn't really become aware of before. And so that started the journey. I don't know if you want me to keep going from there.
Oh, we're going to keep going. We are going to keep going. First of all, I'm so sorry that you went through this. And I'm wondering, I assume that you got the BPPV maneuvers, you got the Epley or whatever maneuvers your physical therapist decided to use. You felt better, but then from the spinning, but you felt awful. So did you pick up the phone and call your doctor? Like what was the next step after that?
So I went to I went to I went to another physical therapist to see if they could help. They just had me start doing exercises. The Epleys weren't the different maneuvers weren't working anymore. They weren't doing anything because I wasn't even triggering at the tests anymore. So it wasn't that. So they started having me doing exercises. I was like, okay, I could feel, here was the interesting part about this whole thing. And this is what really led me to believe this is just nervous system stuff. Every time I got back on my computer, I was anxious all the time. I was having anxiety attacks almost daily. And this is totally new for me. I've never had anxiety attacks like this ever. I noticed that I probably have a lot of built up stress or anxiety or something, and it just never released. But this thing just flipped my nervous system. And for months, for at least I would say 2 to 3 months after the initial event, I was having almost daily anxiety attacks. I couldn't sleep laying down anymore. Because every time I slept in my bed laying down, every time I tried to lay down flat, my brain would start to get really triggered again. Because that was when it first happened. I was in my bed laying down, lights out. So I couldn't sleep in the full dark anymore. And I couldn't sleep laying down anymore. I had to sleep upright with the lights on in order to even fall asleep, because otherwise I would just get too dizzy. I would start spinning again. And then I would just sit up and the dizziness would stop and I would calm down.
So interesting. Even though the BPPV was gone, verified by the physical therapist, your brain was still replicating that pattern.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every time I lay down. So this was going on. In addition to that, I was having like these anxiety attacks. I was waking up probably at 5 in the morning every morning. I don't usually wake up that early. I was waking up 5 in the morning, maybe getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep, which was not helping because I wasn't getting enough sleep. And I would go down to the beach and I would meditate and I would stare at the sunrise. And I would just try to breathe and start the day right and then get up. And so that was helping. But yeah, I was in a very weird space. I was going to tell you something else too.
Was it about what that period of time was like?
Yeah. There was something else that I just remembered and I slipped my mind. But anyway, it was very bizarre, and it was triggering in me all kinds of interesting symptoms. And I started noticing when I was more nervous or more anxious or something, that I would start to feel it worse. I was noticing that the symptoms were slightly changing. So sometimes it would feel dizzy, sometimes I would feel like motion sickness, sometimes I would feel nausea, or both.
Visual symptoms too?
A little bit at first. It wasn't that bad at first, luckily. Okay. But it was like hell. Literally it was like, I'll take any pain over this. This is freaking hell. Like I couldn't. Now here's the interesting part. This is what I was going to say. When I was doing things that were engaging, like when I was working, when I was in meetings, I do martial arts, when I was doing martial arts, any of those things, everything would go away. The dizziness, everything would go away. And as soon as I was done, it would come right back. So I was like, this is interesting. This is really interesting that I was like witnessing this happening. I was going, I am doing things that are engaging my mind and taking my mind off of my symptoms. And I felt no symptoms. And then all of a sudden I would feel symptoms again as soon as it was done.
Interesting.
So that was
when I was that early.
Oh yeah. And I was like,
yeah,
this is something else. And that's when I started listening to you. I started listening to Dan Buglio and his Pain for You channel. And it just made a lot of sense. It was incredible. It's incredible to me what the mind can do, how the mind can create these symptoms. It's just incredible.
I know. And coming from your background, where again, your profession is the mind. It's still wild. It's still wild to see this.
Yeah. I've done years of therapy and years of coaching, and I like knew all this stuff, but like still it came back, and it's just an amazing, evolutionary mechanism that exists in us, that the nervous system will latch onto what it can to indicate danger.
Yes.
Even if it hurts the person. The priority one is survival. So, hey, there's a danger here. And my brain started going, there's a danger when you lay down in the dark. There's a danger when you're walking around in the sun. I started noticing a lot of different things. So for instance, I had gotten years ago, maybe over a decade ago, I had gotten heat stroke. I used to love being in the sun, bathing like a lizard, you know. Then when I went to Catalina with some friends, I got heat stroke and got super dizzy, very anxious, got very nauseous and sick because I hadn't drank enough water, was in the sun for 2 days. Ever since then, more than a decade ago, I am extremely sensitive to sun and heat. And every time I'm in the sun and heat for too long, I start feeling dizzy. Now, the dizziness before this whole thing never triggered me before, never made me anxious. I'm just like, okay, I got to get out of the sun. I go in the sun, I'm fine.
Right.
Since this happened, now they were compounding. Now I get in the sun, I start feeling dizzy. The dizziness makes me go anxious, more dizziness. So I got to stay out of the sun and altogether because now it's making me dizzy, which is really bad, you know?
Right.
So it was like compounding on all these things. And it was very interesting for me to look at this and go, look at all these different interesting things that have been going on. I noticed another thing that when I'm not feeling like everything else is feeling good, I start to feel like I'm doing little like nervous tics, like flexing my muscles or something. Nervous tics when I'm just watching TV, little nervous tics, you know, if I'm not doing something else. When I started feeling dizzy, all the tics went away. Everything went away. Then the dizziness would start to go down after like a few months. The dizziness started to go away and the tics came back. And then 2 days later, the tics would go away and the dizziness comes back. And it would be flip-flopping between these different symptoms.
Yep.
And it's all like just nervous system stuff. And so I started practicing a lot of different techniques and meditation and making sure like I'm really aware of my nervous system. And there was one thing that I did that really flipped the switch for me. And it helped with everything. And it was like all of a sudden, and I've been symptom-free from dizziness stuff, you know, for I think 6 weeks now. And it's the longest period so far since it happened. And every time that I start to recognize, I start feeling a little dizzy or something like that, it doesn't register in my brain right now as something to be anxious about. It just goes, oh, this is just a normal sensation. Yeah, this is just normal. It's something I've felt my whole life. I got up real fast, so I felt a little dizzy. I was in the sun for too long, I felt a little dizzy. And it's just like, it's not a thing that makes me anxious and makes me feel all weird again.
Right. Yeah. And so you're speaking to what recovery looks like. Cause I have people who get to what they call like 90-95%, and they're afraid to say, oh, I'm fully recovered. But when they describe their sensations to me, they're describing completely normal sensations. Yeah. It's just that extra bit of hypervigilance, that extra bit of attention, the brain's still paying to those sensations. But it's like amplifying those. What I was noticing was so let's say I feel a little dizzy now, and I tell my wife, I'm like, yeah, I got up, I feel a little dizzy, I'm feeling, and she would say to me, she goes, I feel dizzy all the time. Like I get up and do things and I feel dizzy, and it's like, but it's fine. Like it's just for a moment, it's fine. Yeah. And I started recognizing, you know what, you're right. Like there's all these moments in our lives where our equilibrium is off for a few seconds and then we get back to normal. But for me, because I went through this, every time my equilibrium went off just a little bit, it would be amplified. I would get nervous. And then it's like all day long, So how did you stop that? Because you said you started to do something that broke that cycle, right? So initially all these became connected. Initially, what really helped me start sleeping again in the dark, flying flat after a couple months, was listening to your meditation on body somatic tracking. So I would do that. I did that for like 5 or 6 days in a row. I would get in my bed. I would do the thing that would trigger me. I would just lie down and start feeling dizzy and get triggered. And then I would listen to that. And as I listened to it, the dizziness would start to fade and I would start to feel relaxed. And then after the meditation, it started to kind of come back again. I would let myself up and I would stop. I wouldn't force myself. And I did that for 5 or 6 days in a row. And all of a sudden I could sleep lying down again in the dark. So I just kept doing it. And so that was early. I was like 3 months in. I was able to sleep again. And then it would kind of come and go. I would go for 2 weeks without symptoms. And then all of a sudden it'd come back for 2 or 3 weeks. Like, frustrating. It would go away and come back. This last time, and my tendency is to like knock on wood because I don't want to jinx it, but I almost feel like I don't know. I'm hoping that it doesn't come back, but I kind of know what to do. This last time, what happened was it came back after being gone for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. It came back again for like 2 or 3 weeks.
it got really bad. We went out of the country for the first time since this happened. We love to travel, but I stopped all travel because I was too messed up. I finally went out of town. We went to Mexico City and did some exploring. And when the first day I got there, my dizziness was like intense, and I could tell I was very anxious. The second day, a little less. The third day, a little less. The fourth day, I was almost back to normal. So I was noticing that just because things were being familiarizing and normalizing for me in my environment, my nervous system could calm and relax. I wasn't so anxious anymore. And then I stopped feeling so dizzy. But that being said, that triggered a several week long kind of just feeling off still. I came home. I was getting really frustrated with this. I was like, why am I still feeling like this? It was gone for weeks, you know, now it's back again. And I did some meditation. I did some internal family systems meditation, in inner child work. And I got to some part that was like a dizzy part. And I got to some part in me that was like a very like deep wisdom. And the deep wisdom was saying to me, you're not being present. You need to be present. So get present right now. And I went, whoop, and it just shut off. The dizziness went away and it hasn't come back. And I felt super present, and I realized what was going on. All of the anxiety is about future fear and memories from the past. It's not if in the present, there is nothing to be afraid of right now.
Right.
Everything to be afraid of is in the future. And if I'm present, there is nothing to be afraid of. And I just got really present. And every time I started feeling a little bit of something come back, I would just go, well, I'm present. I'm going to be present. I feel really present. I'm right here. There's nothing to be afraid of right here. And it's like a magic pill, just gone.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. And I want to remark, I hope it's okay, that I speak to the people who are hearing this and saying, how in the hell do you do that? Right? So how do you develop that sense of presence? Or I try to be in the present, but then I just keep going back to the past or going to my future worries. And I just want to point out, you've devoted your life to these kinds of practices. So for you, it was really more a matter of knowing what to apply and how to apply it to this. But these are practices that you've had for many years. Whereas many of the people who are new to this dizziness thing, they don't have an inner child or meditation practice. They've lived their whole lives feeling, doing other stuff, and all of the strategies that they've used thus far have worked for them. So for you, I think it was less of a paradigm shift than it is for many of the people watching my channel who are new to this whole idea that what are you saying? My nervous system can create physical symptoms. You had been introduced to it a long time before that idea had time to marinate. So for anyone who's hearing this and feeling like, well, why can't I just do that? I know what to do. I just don't know how. Keep in mind that you have had many years of practice, this presence and this sense of being in touch with yourself and cultivating that inner wisdom, or whatever we want to call it, that other people just haven't necessarily had a chance to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I studied meditation for many, many years and have done meditation for years. So that was meditation. I would just say too, like, a place to start is the somatic tracking, because somatic tracking is all about being present. It's being present in your body in that moment. And so that's a great actionable exercise to start with. Right.
Well, and actually, speaking to the internal family systems component, I'm a practitioner myself. I mentioned that to you. And the second somatic tracking that I released, number 2, which is 20 minutes long, it has internal family systems or a little bit of parts work built into it.
That's great.
Teaching people not just to be with the symptoms in a neutral way, which is really important, and being present, like you're saying, but also noticing the parts of you that don't want to be present, noticing the parts of you that are resisting being present, and seeing if you can learn to be present with those parts as well, which is also kind of a tall order, I know, for people. But I'm just so thrilled to hear you were able to use these tools for this purpose. I know I'm not downplaying 7 or 8 months feeling awful, but to be able to immediately shut off the symptoms, to be able to recover in a relatively brief period of time, is a testament to the amount of work that you'd already put in before any of this happening.
It's also, I think I felt very lucky because prior to your channel, I mean, there's really nothing else that talks about dizziness in the context of like chronic symptoms and stuff like at least that I haven't found. And so I don't know, you've launched your channel, what, a couple years ago or
Yeah,
something?
like 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. So like, I feel very lucky that I got this at the time when your channel was up, because there's probably people before that for years not having any answers about this stuff.
I see some of them. Yeah. 20 years, 30 years. Yeah. And so what was that like? Did you, so I know, I'm sorry. I asked you earlier and then we got off track, but did you end up seeing a physician, an ENT or your family physician?
Yeah. I saw an ENT. He examined me, nothing wrong. Couldn't figure out what was wrong. He said, you know, if you continue to feel this way and there, you know, something's going on, like the next thing to do would be go to see like a neurologist. Okay. So I booked an appointment with a neurologist, and then I started noticing the symptoms kind of change and go away. And I thought, you know what? I don't need to go see another doctor. I know what this is. Like, I was just sure. I was like, I know what this is. And I kept listening to you and like Dan and saying like, if you keep going to doctors and you keep trying to reinforce this idea, like, oh, there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with me, it's going to prolong. Just look at all the symptoms, look at the changing of them, look at how they go up and down, look at how you can turn them on and off. If you're like sitting there doing work and doing something engaging and all of a sudden they go off, like those are all signs that this is nervous system stuff. Stop pretending that it's something else. Just go full in and believe it, you know? Yeah. And that was important.
But that, you know, that takes some level of confidence, I think, in yourself, that I think many of the people who come to my channel may not have as fully developed. They have less certainty. It sounds like, again, I don't know anything about your childhood or your background. I mean, not to say that we don't all have our own backgrounds and wounds, but I think many of the people who end up with these issues already lack a certain confidence in their bodies, or already lack a certain, they're already a little uncomfortable with uncertainty in a way that's maybe a little bit more than the average person. And so they're terrified by this thing, very understandably, as were you, but it's a little harder for them to accept this idea that, oh, this is my nervous system. So they're really looking for someone else to come in and say, yes, this is the answer. This is what you need to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very standard, like Western medicine paradigm. So like, there's some symptom, there must be something physically wrong with me if there's a symptom, you know? And so I think too, me having gone through so many doctors with my stomach issues to the point where all kinds of exams, MRI, CAT scan, colonoscopy, like nothing wrong. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, this has to be something else. It has to be emotional, psychological, et cetera. So just having gone through that, I think also primed me for understanding the power of the nervous system and what it can create.
Yeah. But it's so important that you reached that conclusion about the stomach issues as well, because I think also another trend among people with chronic dizziness, not everyone, of course, but many of them have had these previous bouts of medically unexplained symptoms that unfortunately, instead of getting an explanation like you did, they got it's incurable, it's chronic, there's something wrong with you line.
You got IBS.
Just help you. Yeah. They get a syndrome name.
Probiotics, whatever, the standard stuff. Yeah. Done, nothing works. Yeah.
And so they've never been told, wow, there's some connection here to your nervous system. There's some connection here to your background, to your emotions. Yeah. And then they end up in a situation in which it's happened again. And there's no reason for them to believe that this is even a possibility. So again, it sounds like what you went through a horrible experience. I'm so grateful for you that you came into it with the background that you did, because I think that's why you've been able to pull yourself out the way you have. Yeah,
and also because I think that led me very early on to think this is not just a physical thing. This is a nervous system thing. And so I was able to find your video very quickly and start this work within the month of feeling. Cause I was like, there's no way that this is just normal for me to be feeling this for this long. So, right. So some people probably don't think about that and find you for a year or two. And, so yeah. So
Yeah.
I was lucky in that. Yeah. So, and by the way, you know, one thing that I'll say, that I recognized when I was going through this was the fact that this was leading me into a realm of exploring my mind, exploring my nervous system, trying to understand it, what other symptoms I was experiencing throughout my life, and what other kinds of potentially traumas that I was, whatever, that was deep in there and I was uncovering in this process. I recognized that not only if someone goes through this process of really diving into their chronic pain and into their nervous system and the traumas that's locked in there, and if they really dive into this and do some self-exploration, not only will you get back to a place where you feel normal again, you're going to get to a place that's better than ever before if you do this. So this is actually, like, for me, I felt like this is an opportunity to get better than I ever was, to not go back to where I was a year ago. No, I don't want to go back to having stomach issues and tics and whatever, all the nervous. I want to get better than I ever was. And this was an opportunity to do it. And I think that if you take it that way, you really can improve your entire life. This is like a great opportunity to do it.
I 100% agree. And I know it's really hard for people to hear that when they're suffering. They're like, Yoni, there's just no way that this is ever going to be a good thing. But I hear it from people over and over. When I talk to people in their success stories, I'm not prompting them ahead of time to say this. They say, I'm, you know, in so many ways, I'm glad this happened. Nothing would have stopped me and made me do the work that I needed to do.
Right.
Exactly. So they'll say it that way, or they'll say what you said. They'll say, this is work that I really needed to do, and I am better for having done it. And you know, again, I also tell people, your life's not going to be the same as it was pre PPPD or MdDS or whatever diagnostic label they've given you. It's not going to be the same. You don't want it to be the same because it's what's got you here in the first place. I mean, whether it started with a freak vestibular event or not, your nervous system was in a state of high alert for some reason. That's what caused the symptoms to go chronic, and it's worth figuring out why it was doing that so that you don't end up there again when something else comes along, anything else comes along.
Absolutely. It's an absolute it's the same way that I look at conflict. You know, you could try to avoid it, or you could just try to squash it and just go back to normal, or you can use it as an opportunity to grow, to get healthier, to get stronger in the relationship and yourself, whatever. This is an opportunity.
Well, let's talk about that. So, you know, unless, of course, there's something else you wanted to share about your recovery or any words of advice or wisdom beyond what you just shared. I would only say as advice, like, at some point when you've exhausted the medical, you know, route, and you feel like that no one's finding anything, try your best to just go all in and just say, this is nervous system stuff. There's nothing else. There's nothing physically wrong with me. It's just nervous system stuff. And I need to figure out a way to get my nervous system to calm down. And when I do that, my whole life will be better than it was even before this started. Like, just that, whatever that thought process is, that mantra, like, if you can keep that, it's totally, totally possible. Amen. And living proof right here. And many of the other stories people hear on my channel. Yeah, for sure. And those stories help me too, just listening to people. Yeah. And I'm that's a big goal of mine too, to just put as many of those out there as I can. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So wait. So conflict. So you were talking about conflict and saying it's an opportunity. Yeah. So maybe we can back up a little bit and you can share a little bit more about why conflict is even a problem. Like what issues do conflicts bring up that are potentially a danger for people who are prone to physical symptoms? So where does conflict play a role here when someone is dealing with chronic physical symptoms or in danger of having chronic physical symptoms? It's a big question, and there's I think a lot of potential answers. Well, if we look at just the baseline normal, sort of what the definition of conflict is, for instance, like if conflict is a perception of competing needs, goals, or values, okay, it doesn't mean we have conflicts all day long. They could be little challenges. They could be conflicts with ourselves. They can be conflicts with other people. It doesn't need to be some big thing.
the problem for people becomes, and this is a lot of the things that I deal with, is called escalated conflicts and also protracted conflicts. And sometimes they're protracted escalated conflicts. So escalated conflicts are things where there is a deep perception of threat or impediment to the fundamental needs of the individual or the group. Okay, that's the, so when that threat is triggered, that threat perception is triggered, it creates survival mechanisms, defensive mechanisms, all kinds of interesting psychological components, behavioral components, emotional components. So that's escalated. Fight or flight, defensive mode, that's escalated conflict. That's an issue, and that's something that to sort of to manage and to deal with. The other one is protracted conflict, which is conflicts that have gone on for long periods of time. They don't get resolved, and they just keep, you know, sort of existing either very actively or very passively, but they never get resolved. And sometimes they're escalated, protracted. Like if you see like international conflicts between warring states, these are escalated, protracted conflicts. Lots of defense and violence and fight or flight survival mechanisms going on for long periods of time. So those are the types of things that typically, if you are in an escalated conflict and you don't deal with it properly, and that creates trauma because there's a very serious, overwhelming feeling of threat to your fundamental needs, that can really mess up your nervous system. And your nervous system is the key to, you know, chronic symptoms, including dizziness. And the same thing with protracted. You know, if you don't, so learning how to manage conflict effectively is super important from what I've found in my work, to making sure that you stay in a place where your nervous system stays calm and it feels like, you know, you're confident enough to deal with some of the things that come up in your daily life. And a lot of people just don't have the skills to manage conflict. And so what they do is they either get too aggressive and they have, you know, blow ups in their relationships, or they completely avoid conflict. And it's all becomes passive aggressive, or they just become very stuck and very unhappy and frustrated. So, you know,
or dizzy,
and all of that can lead to dizziness. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So what you're saying is that conflicts can trigger that danger mode response that we talk about so frequently on my channel on the level of the individual.
Absolutely.
Even outside of interpersonal relationships. And so maybe you can say a little more about that, because many times when I think of conflicts, I think of, you know, conflicts with my partner, I think of conflicts with my kids, with my friends. But you're saying that even in the workplace, especially, and you didn't say this, but I'm wondering about these kind of protracted conflicts that can occur. They're often not blow-ups. They're not these huge escalated conflicts. They're kind of more insidious, under the radar conflicts. You're saying that is an additional source of what I would call internal stress or nervous system.
Well, and that becomes escalated because they become defensive if it doesn't get processed. So folks that and a lot of times we'll find out that it started with like an initial event, like, you know, something as benign as, you know, I walked into a meeting and they said hi to everybody but me. Right. And so they must not like me. And that happened 2 years ago. And ever since then, she's been out to get me. Right. And so there's this perception of, one of the things we work on is called hostile attribution bias, which basically means my brain is filtering hostility through this person's behavior through a lens of hostility. Yeah. And so everything they do now seems like it's a hostile act, whether it's an email, a text, and they'll send emails. And then like, I'll have a client say, you see, this is the email they send. You see what they're, and I look at it and it's completely benign. If you read it from the outside, you're like, that's your interpretation. And so helping people figure out how to reinterpret. But yeah, so it's this hostile attribution bias that gets just perpetuated over long periods of time. And boy, does that increase nervous system activity. So conflict for sure is a stress of nervous system activity. Now, conflicts can happen with any entity that is perceived to threaten or impede one's needs. That could be with a person. It could be with a group of people. It could be with an abstract idea of a system, right? You see that in socio-political, debates and stuff like that. It's like the system is against me in some way. So any entity that you perceive to have agency, and that agency is threatening you or impeding you, it can create a feeling of defensiveness, survival, conflict, fight or flight, etc. And then you have another area of not just interpersonal or intergroup conflict, but you have intrapersonal or intrapsychic conflict. People are in conflict with themselves around, and with where I work in the workplace, within their work boundaries, they're in conflict. So the things they're doing at work, the fact that they don't have boundaries and terms around their work life, they don't have work-life balance. This was the interesting thing about me becoming dizzy. When this happened, I have several clients that I coach, and some of them I revealed that to them that I was having these dizziness symptoms because I had to cancel some meetings with them and stuff like that. And they had never told me before, but all of a sudden revealed to me, I experience chronic dizziness too. I've been seeing doctors in this. How did you never tell me about this? Right? It never came up before. And so we totally related on that. And then I started kind of connecting the dots. I started relaying to them all this information I was learning through your channel and through just the MindBody channel or the MindBody work in general. And it was very interesting to them. And they started watching you and so we were doing a lot of work around it. And as we started setting boundaries and working on some of their particular issues, and it wasn't really interpersonal conflict stuff. It was really their own inner conflict with their work life. We started working on that. Their symptoms started to decrease, and I don't know if it's totally gone yet, but the last time, like I talked to my client, last week, and he said that he hasn't experienced any symptoms for a while, which is a new thing,
Amazing.
Yeah.
So interesting to hear you say this, because I say this also, of course, I'm not an expert in your field, but I've noticed these patterns in my clients. I mentioned at the beginning, they're conflict avoidant, but it's not so much that they're all in on the conflict avoidance. It's that they're stuck, they're frozen. They can't decide what to do because they have this internal conflict, this, what I would say, polarization of parts, right? They have a part of them that's like, I need to stand up for myself. And then there's another part, oh, just don't make too much noise, they'll leave you, or whatever it is. And so that's where the avoidance comes in. The avoidance comes in to have to pull them away from that kind of polarization because there's no resolution.
That's right. That's a great example of inner conflict.
Yeah.
And looking at inner conflicts was so helpful for me. Yeah. Because you're right. There's people, this is an interesting aspect of what creates conflict in workplaces that I deal with a lot. There are people that are on we deal with this called like the AAA spectrum of conflict communication. So on one side you have avoidance. On the other end of the spectrum you have aggression, and then in the middle you have assertiveness. And people don't know how to be assertive. They don't understand what it means. They either feel like if I confront this person, or if I I try to resolve this conflict, it's either going to come off as aggressive and I'm going to get too intense with the person, and then that's going to be a problem. Or maybe I should just avoid it because otherwise they might leave me. They might not like me anymore. And so you have these folks that are like, they're either, I want to be liked by everybody, so I don't want to confront anybody. I never want to hold anybody accountable. And that pisses everybody off, especially when they're in a leadership position. Like no one's being held accountable because our leader does not know how to hold people accountable because they're too afraid of not being liked. So that's on the one end. And then on the other end, it's the aggressive leader. And the leader's like, every time they confront someone or try to give them feedback about something, it comes off as this really intimidating, intense, like you're not doing anything right, you're doing everything wrong kind of thing. So they don't know the middle ground of that assertiveness, where it's like, you can be a nice person, a good person, but also hold people accountable in a very calm and effective way where they don't feel attacked, but they know that there's some structure around them. And so it's just like parenting, it's like, you can't parent a healthy child with no structure. You have to give them structure, but you also have to be supportive and encouraging. You can't just be demanding all the time. There has to be that middle ground of supportive and encouraging, but also structured and disciplined. And that's exactly the same with leadership. And when they don't do it, it creates all kinds of conflicts. Right.
Well, but you can see how people would carry into these work situations. I don't even want to say conflict, because sometimes there isn't actually an external conflict at all.
Right.
But they're carrying in these strategies from earlier on in their lives, from irrelevant situations. So again, not to say that I don't have folks with dizziness symptoms that are aggressive. I mean, some people do struggle with anger issues, but in general, when I work with people with dizziness, typically the typical person is going to be more on the end of that avoidance, because there's some strategy that they've developed over time that makes the alternative just too painful. There's something too painful about the potential, even just the potential of being too aggressive.
I'll tell you the common thing that I see is a codependent style of
Tell me more about that. Yeah.
So someone who is very, very concerned about disappointing people, upsetting people, letting them down, i.e. being abandoned by them, that kind of thing.
So is that where that's coming from?
I think so. That's something that we worked on a lot was codependence, because here you have these very high level executives, for instance. One was a female, one was a male, very high level, have big teams. And there was in addition to sort of like not having boundaries with work, where like I'm willing to, go home, work till 7, go home, have dinner with my kids, and then I get back on the computer at 10 o'clock at night. Like in addition to that kind of thing, which is, we need to create boundaries for your work life. But in addition to that, they have this mindset where I need to take on other people's stuff. I need to make sure everybody else is doing their stuff. And if I don't, it won't get done right. So they have like a need to be needed and need to be the one who like kind of controls things in some way or make sure everything's being done. If someone can't do their own work, then I have to take it on, or there's no one else will get it done. I'm not willing to let other people take the consequences of not doing their work. So because it'll look badly on me or something like that. And lo and behold, both of them grow up with, anxious parents who they had to emotionally care for in some way and make sure that their anxious mother or anxious father was okay. And so that sets up this codependent mindset of like, put my needs aside and just focus on this other person's needs. And that's what they do as leaders. And on some level, it's gotten them to a certain place, but now they're super stressed out, experiencing all kinds of symptoms, including dizziness. And it's like, we need to start putting boundaries around this. And how do you put boundaries around codependence? You need to, there's an emotional component to this called guilt, and guilt is the glue of codependence. And the thing to break codependence, number one, is to recognize cognitively, I'm not responsible for other people's lives and emotions. I'm responsible for my own behavior. I have to do what is right for me and fulfill my needs, regardless of who it disappoints. And that brings up fear and guilt. And then the work is, okay, can I learn to tolerate my feelings of fear and guilt?
Yes. Can I make space for it? Can I be with it?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And if I can't, I'm gonna keep trying to solve my feelings of guilt by assuaging everybody and never feeling guilty. I don't want to feel guilty. I feel too guilty. I'm selfish. No, we need to learn how to feel guilt, and eventually you will learn that you are not being selfish. Eventually you will learn, your body will stop honing into guilt all the time when you're not taking on the needs of other people and neglecting your own needs. So it's like, it's a lot of work to break through codependence, but boy, when they do it, their life opens up. They become liberated, and that's where I'm trying to help them get to, where they can feel better about work, feel better about life, be a good leader that's not micromanaging and controlling, and also not feeling like they always have to make sure everybody's doing everything exactly correct, or else they have to take it on themselves. Like, there's a lot of work to be done, but that sort of thing, when they get liberated from codependent, sort of behavioral patterns that they learn growing up, that it liberates them. So all this historical trauma comes in from the past, and they project it and transfer it onto the people they work with.
Yes.
It's the same in relationships and their marriages.
Yes. Yes. So what you're saying is this kind of codependent pattern. I know I've pulled us in that direction, and I'm sure there may be other patterns that may produce kind of that more aggressive style that you were talking about. But there's more than just conflict avoidance that comes with it. There's also this, you're saying, this conscientiousness, this desire to be responsible for everyone else's problems, maybe a perfectionism, like I've got to do everything right. So a lot of those things are stemming from that same issue, that same codependence, which, as you mentioned, derives from this often not traumatic experiences necessarily as children, sometimes perfectly ordinary, but not ideal situations as children, where people may have had to learn to take responsibility for other people, or learn that their value depended on them taking responsibility for other people.
Where their needs are not as important as other people's needs. And if they make their own needs important, those people might leave them.
Yes.
That was the setup. And so that paradigm stays with them through life until they're actually able to break it.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Okay. I mean, this dovetails so nicely with everything that we talk about. I mean, in terms of chronic dizziness. So I'm curious then. So again, since you've mentioned some of your clients that you've seen have chronic physical symptoms, pain or dizziness or other symptoms, do you see people who are kind of on the more aggressive end of that spectrum also suffering from some of these physical issues, or is that not as common for them?
I'll be honest, the ones that are more aggressive hardly get coaching. They don't, most of those folks don't think they need to improve anything.
Okay. So you may not know.
It's everyone else's fault. It's not my fault, kind of thing. So they don't typically make good coaching clients. So they don't get too far into coaching.
Yeah. So I personally, that's actually a really great point, because I've always said, I don't see a lot of angry people, like people who are just super aggressive and angry. But you're right. There's probably a selection bias there. They're not the ones out there looking for help a lot of the time.
Exactly. Yeah. I've had some that come to me because they are being perceived as intimidating or aggressive by other people. And they've been very open. And so we've worked on some great stuff, but they have not reported to me anything like chronic pain or dizziness or anything like that. Yeah. It's really more the ones who are the people pleasers,
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So I guess that leads me to a question that I'm also really curious to hear your answer about. So we've talked a little bit about conflicts, but workplace stress in general, it seems like certain people are more prone to being affected by that. So would you say that category of people also includes the people we were just talking about, or are there other things that also make people more vulnerable to workplace stress than others?
I think from what I've seen, every human being is affected by work. If they're in any kind of environment, whether it's a workplace environment, a community environment, a family environment, where their needs are being perceived as threatened or impeded in some way by the system or the group, they're going to be under a chronic part of stress. This is a big reason. If you extrapolate this out to what's going on like sociopolitically right now, and if you watch the news or you watch the media and you have dizziness symptoms or any chronic symptoms, I'm going to tell you right now, stop watching the news, stop watching the media, because that's all they're doing is creating a sense of threat to your fundamental goals, values, and needs by the system, by the groups, by these people, by those people, right? So just stop. I mean, I completely cut out media, and it was a world of difference.
Liberating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Completely. I deleted all my social media except for LinkedIn because I need it for business. I've deleted all my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, gone. I stopped watching the media, and it was a world of difference when I did all this stuff. And it's like, and by the way, like I say this to people and they go, but then how do you stay in the know? And I'm like, why do you need to know all that stuff? Like for what? You know what I do? My wife can listen to news and she doesn't get affected like I do. And so what I started doing was I said, hey, babe, if anything's going on that you think I need to know about,
let me know
in my community, whatever, something's going to affect us financially, blah, blah, blah. Let me know. But other than that, tell me nothing. I don't want to know. And my life is it's better. Right. It's not affected at all. I don't need to know all this. I don't need to know what happened, the bank robber in Tallahassee. I don't need to know it. Right. For what?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I have so much to say about this. I completely agree with you. I do the same. And my life has never been better from that perspective. And in fact, I have some hacks for people. So I find reading news sometimes from other countries can be really helpful because I'm not involved in their stuff as deeply or as emotionally.
Not as a threat.
Right. So it's like, oh, and like reading. I mean, of course, there are some things that are, of course, the world is all connected now. So it's not like it doesn't affect you in any way, but reading local news from, a small town in South Africa, I'm like, this is, gives me an idea of what's going on in the world, but I'm not as in it. It doesn't feel like it's affecting me as personally. So that's something I'll do occasionally if I feel like I really need to know what's going on. But that also actually makes me wonder. So on one hand, I feel like taking responsibility internally for how we're reacting to the environment is really important. But then sometimes the external environment really is a problem. So I'm wondering in a workplace situation, so you described one earlier where someone's perceiving a threat from a coworker who's not actually threatening. That's clearly really an internal situation. But how do people know? How do people know whether it's the way they're perceiving it and they need to take responsibility, or if there's actually something going on at the workplace that's not okay? And then what do they do about it if that's the case?
Yeah, well, so typically when we get called in, it's gone on for long enough that HR can no longer like manage it. There's maybe an investigation has happened and there's been no findings. So legal investigation has already happened. There's been no findings, all that stuff. So we get to the point where people have already gone through that. And now it's just like, okay, this is an interpersonal problem. Okay. Now,
so we've ruled out the external.
We've ruled out the, it's kind of like ruled out the medical, rule it, and then now it's an actual interpersonal. So it's sometimes like one person who's kind of having problems with multiple people, and maybe that person either maybe they're not the right fit in that role. Maybe they're not the right fit in the company. Maybe they can be coached and they can start, changing their behavior in some way. Or sometimes it's like two people, they're just personality clash. They don't get along. They don't have their communication styles don't go well together. And we have to kind of work with both of them. So, I mean, that's typically a lot of the times, the ones that we deal with 90% of the time, it's something around perception of each other, misinterpretations of each other's behaviors and actions. And they just need to talk more. They need to have more togetherness to understand each other a little better, to clarify things. Now, this is not comfortable stuff.
I was just about to say that sounds so uncomfortable.
Oh, no, totally. And so everybody has to be, so the thing I say is like, to resolve conflict with someone, the cost benefit analysis of any relationship, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship, the value of this relationship has to outweigh overwhelmingly the cost of managing it. That's with every relationship. Okay. I'm in a workplace now, and how big is my motivation to resolve this? How much am I motivated to actually go through the discomfort and the effort it's going to take to talk to this person and clarify and get to know them a little bit better and understand them and build some trust with them? Like how motivated am I? Do I really want this job? Is it really important to me? Do I really love working here and the mission here and the other team members? Do I really love all that stuff? Okay, so maybe I'm motivated. But if you get to someone, and this has happened too, we get in there, it's like, I don't need to work with this person. Maybe I should find another job. I don't need this anymore. No one treats me right. It's like, okay, what are you doing here? Like, why are you not then taking responsibility? And sometimes that becomes the coaching program, is like really encouraging them and supporting them to find the confidence to leave this environment that doesn't work for them anymore. Or if they're motivated, okay, we're going to learn some new skills. We're going to start meeting with this person and figuring out how to understand them better and how to make sure they understand us better and clarify things, so it just depends on how motivated you are. If you're in a relationship with your marriage and you really want to stick to it, you're motivated enough to go to therapy and learn how to communicate better for a long time.
Okay. So a takeaway here then. So if it is an external, again, it may feel external, even if it's internal sometimes to people. So I think it's good for us to put that out there, that if you're perceiving hostility where there is none, it's still going to feel like the hostility is coming from the outside. So that's not always a good indicator of whether it's you that needs to change or the environment that needs to change.
Right.
But what you're speaking to here is that one way so there are a couple different ways you can differentiate. First of all, are there truly value-based reasons to stay? Like, do you actually want to be there? And also having the confidence, and I think this is key for people, having the confidence to make that judgment for yourself, to know that something might not be a good fit and that you have the opportunity to do something else. And it seems to me that when there are truly external conflicts, if someone is lacking that confidence, that's the issue. It's not so much that, not to say, of course, that the external conflict's not a problem. It's that's the thing that needs to be worked on, the confidence. Like, I need to feel confident enough to know that I can make a decision here about perhaps doing something else.
Yeah.
So,
well, when someone, it's a good question. When someone says, what's the difference between what I'm perceiving and what's real? Like, hey, am I just perceiving there's a conflict? So I would say there's a number of things you can do. I would say number one, the first step always is to try to talk to the person you're having an issue with and to see if you can get anywhere, because you might just kill it right there if you can talk to them. If that's not working, or if you tried that, didn't work, or if you don't want to do that, then maybe the next thing is to go to whoever your leader is, whoever your direct supervisor is, and have a very, frank, but like, calm conversation. Here's what's going on. Here's what I'm feeling. What do you think about this? Like, do you notice this? If you read this email, does it read to you like I'm reading it? And like getting a check-in with other people from an objective standpoint. Okay. Let's say now that person says, let's say they say, you know what, this does seem a little aggressive. Maybe they can call the person in, maybe they can facilitate a conversation. If it gets worse, then I would say you go to HR, you file a complaint with HR, you put it in the docs, you get documentation of it. They start working things out. And, if it doesn't get solved by then, if HR doesn't have they don't feel like they have the capacity to solve it for you and get you into a room and talk this out, then maybe at that point it's worth hiring a professional mediator, facilitator, if it's worth you staying there. Right. That kind of. So if there's real wrongdoing, I don't do the work. If there's real wrongdoing, it's lawyers, it's EEOC complaints, it's other stuff. When I do the work, it's because people have gotten to the point where like, this is an interpersonal problem and we want to work this out.
Gotcha. Yeah. I was just thinking it'd be good because again, again, this is something I'm always looking at this through the lens of interpersonal conflicts, because that's what I encounter most in my work. Right. Sure. People wonder if they're imagining it or not. Like, is this person mistreating me, or am I just being too sensitive? And check in with tricky.
Check in with a couple of people that you trust, that you think are smart, who aren't yes men, who will give you an honest truth. Yeah. Exactly. Check in with some of those. And if you need to, find an objective third party, like a therapist or a counselor, or a coach or someone, and check in with them. And see if this is, and if it, listen, regardless of whether or not it's real or it's not, there's something going on with perception, and it's worth having a conversation with the other person so that they can understand when you say this or when you do this, it's landing with me in this way. I'm not saying you're intending to do that. Right. I just want you to know how it's impacting or how it's landing with me. And so that way there's some clarity there, and the person can they can adjust if necessary. They can say, they can make a decision. Oh, I didn't know that when I say that to you, it's landing with you, that I won't say that anymore. Or you know what, I'll say it in a different way. Or you know what, I need to be able to talk to you about this stuff, even though it's landing with you in this way. What's a better way for me to talk to you about it? That kind of
these are great tips. Yes.
Yeah. So there's lots of opportunity there, but it takes a little bit of discomfort at first.
Oh yeah. So hard. I mean, but what you're saying is just a private, non-emotional, like this, like taking ownership, even if you believe the problem is 100% external, taking ownership for your perception and seeing if you can walk into that conversation with even the smallest amount of curiosity about what the other person is perceiving.
I'll give you a very simple sequence that we teach to people. It's called the bear sequence. Okay. It's for giving people feedback. And what I mean by feedback is someone's doing something that is not sitting right with me, and I need to talk to them about it. Okay. Okay. So the first thing is behavior. Bear stands for behavior. I add a little I in there for interpretation. You can use that or not. Behavior, interpretation, effect, ask, and request. So the behavior piece is, before we want to give feedback to someone, I want to separate out their behavior from my interpretation and the effects of their behavior. Separate them out. So I don't come to someone and say, you were really rude to me. Or I don't come to someone and say, you always do that thing. Like, I don't do any of that. I just go and I be very specific. I say, hey, last night when we were talking and you told me that you didn't want to come over. When you said that. So that's pure behavior. I'm not judging it. I'm not appraising it. I'm being very specific about the behavior. Right. When you told me that you didn't want to come over, the way that I interpreted that was, or the story I started telling myself was, that you don't really want to spend time with me. And as a result, here's the effect part. As a result, I started feeling really sad. Like, and I'm not real sure where we stand. Now comes the ask part. Behavior. When I do feedback, when we give someone some feedback on what's going on and how it's landing with us, we always open up the conversation. So it's a two-way conversation. I want collaboration here. So the ask part in the sequence is, why didn't you come over? Or do you want to still spend time with me? Are you feeling differently? Are you feeling strange about this? Ask them and let them talk and listen. Be honest with me. Just be honest. Okay. Based on what you hear during the ask part is the last part is the request. I'm going to make a request, or what do you have as a suggestion? Like, okay, well, so what I'm hearing is you didn't want to come over because you were super tired. And I interpreted that as, my interpretation. I got a little wacky. I'm sorry. Like, I just went off but what I would request is maybe next time, if you feel really tired and you don't want to come over, can you just let me know, hey, I'm feeling really tired, and maybe like ask me for another date that we can schedule, so that I know that you're not just trying to blow me off, but you're just really obviously tired and we're going to schedule for something else. Would that be okay with you? Great. So we've created some clarity now, right? I've separated out any interpretation or effect that your behaviors had on me from the behavior itself. I didn't put that stuff on you. That's on me. My interpretation is on me. The effect it had on me is on me. The behavior is your behavior. So that's the part. So if someone can own their behavior, yes, I did do that. They don't have to own your interpretation of the behavior. Okay, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean that. I actually was just really tired. I'm sorry that I didn't communicate that well. That's the truth. I'd love to see you again, whatever that is, right? So that little sequence, behavior, my interpretation, the effect it had, ask about what they intended, and then make a request. That little sequence is a really nice, powerful sequence for getting clear with someone and communicating feedback,
That was awesome. That was so awesome. I loved that. I of course, in my mind, in my IFS mind, I'm thinking speaking for a part instead of speaking from a part. So rather than I'm angry and you stink,
yes.
I am noticing that a part of me is holding anger right now.
Yeah.
Could we be curious about that together? Right. I mean, again, that's in the spirit of what you were just saying. So I just loved everything about what you just said. So when people do that, so first of all, I mean, it still sounds uncomfortable, but that sounds a little more doable to me. Right.
Because you're not putting someone on the defensive. You're just saying, hey, you did that thing. You did that thing. We both agree that you said that. Right. We both agree that you did that.
Right.
I'm not asking you to agree on my interpretation of it.
Right.
Or that you intended to affect me or impact me in that way. I'm not asking you to agree that. I'm just asking you to agree to the behavior.
Right. So when people do that, in general, you see that the other party will respond in a much less defensive way.
Yes.
And they can work toward the goal collaboratively of reducing both the behavior and the interpretation that were problematic.
We can reduce the behavior, or we can reinterpret. Sometimes the behavior is okay as long as we reinterpret it.
Right. Right. So do you work on that component of things too with people? So
sure.
This sounds like a wonderful way of addressing whatever is going on externally, while also kind of being aware of our internal environment.
It's absolutely a two-channel approach.
Right.
I have to let someone know how their behavior is affecting me so they can make a choice, their own choice, whether to change their behavior. But I also have to start reinterpreting based on what they told me. So if I said to someone, like, for instance, I deal with this all the time, communication-wise. Two people get together. I see this in romantic relationships. I also see it in workplace relationships.
I was about to say everything that you're saying is totally applicable to any kind of relationship, any human relationship. Yeah.
And I see this dynamic all the time. One person is a very direct communicator. They're very blunt. They're very straightforward. They're A type. And the other person is very B type, more passive communicator, very indirect. They want to process things more before they speak and that kind of stuff. And they're trying to communicate. And the direct one is feeling super intense and almost aggressive to the other one, but they don't mean to. That's just the way they talk. That's the way they behave. They're just used to this. But the perception is, whoa, they're really coming at me. And then that person starts to shut down and not really understand the processing. And it takes them a while to figure out how to respond. And so the other person who was aggressive starts feeling like this person's completely shutting me out. They're not getting back to me. They don't respond to me. They're completely withdrawing. They're ignoring me. Like, and then they start getting triggered. So they're both getting triggered by each other's styles. And if they're motivated enough to work on this, then number one, they can both work on their styles from a behavioral standpoint. Like, okay, I can maybe come at them a little bit less aggressive. And the other person, maybe I can do something, whether it's listen and repeat or something that makes them feel like I am listening. I'm not just shutting down on them. Okay. So maybe we can do that. But in addition, they also have to start working on their perception of the other's behavior. So when this person starts talking at me, I need to really start feeling like they're not trying to be aggressive. They're not trying to attack me. This is just the way they are. This is the way they are with everyone. This is just the way they are. And I'm okay. I'm safe. No one's threatening me and that kind of thing. And if I feel a little bit intense, I have permission to say, hey, you know what? This feels a little intense. Can we just take it down a notch? I have permission to do that. So working on the internal as well. And then the other person too. Hey, if they're not responding right away, I just have to remind myself, if I can catch myself in the moment and remind myself, they're not trying to ignore me. They're not trying to like blow me off. It just takes them a while to process and to respond. I just have to remember that. So maybe I can slow down a little bit, you know? So they both have to work on the behavior and on the interpretation pieces.
So what you're describing is a primarily cognitive behavioral type approach. And so I'm curious, in your work then, how important is it when someone recognizes one of these patterns, right? Like, I'm interpreting that person as aggressive, for example. So say that's one of the people you're working with coaching. How important is it for you to understand the roots of that strategy? Like looking
of the
back.
interpretation?
Yes. Is it important to understand it, or is it important to just notice it and then fix it?
It depends on the person. A lot of the people I work with, if they're willing to go there with me, it can be very powerful, but it takes a while and it takes a little bit more work. And luckily I've had great clients, even workplace, you know, people that I coach, you know, organizations hire me to train some of their leaders, and they take the opportunity to go deep, some of them. And so absolutely, like going back even to childhood, even to like, when did you first start perceiving being aggressed upon? You know, who was the first relationship that you had where you started feeling like they were really intimidating, or where you started feeling like they were shutting you out or something? Like, talk to me about that a little bit. And really going back there and helping them notice their historical patterns and traumas and how they have carried with those through life and have transferred those onto both their personal relationships and their workplace relationships. And noticing that and becoming aware of it is very transformational, to like actually become aware of it, because you can start to like separate out some of your historical stuff. It's not always super easy because it's very unconscious, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say this, because from my perspective, again, a cognitive behavioral approach to this is it works to resolve conflicts, and it works to resolve chronic dizziness when people just aren't afraid of their symptoms anymore, and they keep going and they know where things are coming from. But to me, if we really want to undo some of those strategies, rather than have to fight them off every time they happen, it seems like we want to unravel them from where they started, which tends to be long before you were ever in the workplace.
Oh yeah. Right? Listen, and my go-to strategy, I tell this for everybody, go to internal family systems. Like that is the modality that I have found to be the most powerful from any modality that I've tried. Inner child work, whether it's just from the John Bradshaw field or internal family. And the book No Bad Parts has been very transformational for some of my clients.
Yes.
So I would highly recommend that.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm just thrilled to death to hear you say that, because that has been my primary, I guess, modality. I don't even view it as a modality. I view it as a philosophical approach. I mean, that's the philosophical. But
it's also true.
But it's true. Yeah.
It's true. I mean, there really are pieces of our minds that are, this goes back to Freud. I mean, the unconscious freezes in repressed states because they became too overwhelmed.
Yes.
And this is what the parts are. The parts are frozen states that were repressed at different points in life because they were overwhelmed traumatically or from the nervous system perspective. So it's true. I mean, we're visualizing children, but the parts themselves that are frozen in time with those emotions, those are real. Those are in there. And we just happen to be able to visualize them with children, but
right.
Yeah.
Right, or sense them in many cases, even if
Yeah.
it's not a visual, but like there's a you can reach these states through sensory experiences too.
Yeah.
It's not always
It's
visual.
not always visual. Yeah.
Yeah. So just for anyone who's not familiar with internal family systems, as we've been discussing, it's generally used as a therapeutic approach, but it's really applicable. Again, as I think as a philosophical approach, the idea being that our minds are comprised of, and our bodies really are comprised of multiple parts. So you know how you'd say a part of me really wants to eat that cheesecake, but a part of me feels like maybe I shouldn't eat that cheesecake. So this is a very normal thing. This isn't multiple personality disorder, but the idea being that, like Jeremy was saying, that these parts are driven by earlier experiences. And that's why we end up with these different strategies, sometimes for the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were describing earlier this situation where you have an internal conflict, it can be really helpful to understand where each side is coming from. And again, these are based on our past experiences, because when we have that understanding, we can help tone down the conflict. Just as we were talking about toning down the conflict on the outside, you can do that on the inside too.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. Conflict and peace start from the inside. If you are at a place of total peace in yourself, mm-hmm. which is hard to get to, but if you're at a place of peace with yourself, there's almost no chance you're going to be in conflict with other people. And if you're in a place of conflict with yourself, there's almost no chance you're going to be at peace with everyone else.
Wow. How do your corporate clients respond to hearing something like that?
They're human beings, so they get it. They know it. They know because they're all in internal conflicts. They all have internal conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not hard for them to, well, because again, I'm thinking about someone who's in this high-powered job, who's already stressed out, already dealing with a lot of responsibility, now is dealing with this conflict with this other person who's also dealing with all this stress. And then you roll in and say, hey, it's actually all going on inside you. Does that land well with people? Or, I mean, but
I don't ever get there until I build a lot of rapport with them.
Okay.
There's plenty of,
it's your fault.
Yeah. There's plenty of coaching that goes on with me and them before I get to that state, mm-hmm. Typically if we're doing like what we call our peacemaking program, which is it's a much shorter program. It's just mm-hmm. purely like we do a couple of coaching sessions and a mediation. Mm-hmm. We don't typically get that deep. We
mm-hmm.
get into behavioral patterns, communication styles, and then start to get into like problem solving. So, mm-hmm. That's a quicker program. But when I get to do coaching programs, like long-term coaching programs with folks, mm-hmm. that's when I can build rapport and really get some deep stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because ostensibly here we are. I figured we were going to have a conversation about workplace stress. And one of the questions I was going to ask you was about, well, why should people care about workplace stress? Like I mean, not that who cares, but you're there and then you go home. But I feel like we've already answered the question of why people should care about workplace stress, because it reflects all the other patterns that you have everywhere else in your life. So why not work on it via your workplace, right?
Yeah. And you spend several hours at work and you're stressing yourself out for several hours a day. Like that's really hard on your nervous system. Like no wonder you have symptoms.
Right. Right. And so when I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but can you speak to the kinds of experiences you've seen in people with physical symptoms? What kinds of journeys have they had as they start to resolve some of these conflicts? You mentioned setting boundaries. Have you seen them very clearly getting into a more, I guess I hate to use the word regulated, but their nervous system seem to calm down and they seem to feel better?
When they're willing to be disciplined about the strategies that we develop or mm-hmm. that they develop and I support them in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But it's very difficult for some of these folks because again, they're very A-type, they're perfectionistic. Mm-hmm. They're very much want to make sure everything's done right. And if it doesn't get done right, no matter whose job it was, it's on them. They take it all on. Mm-hmm. So it takes a lot of discipline, but like, can I set a boundary? Can I say at 6 o'clock, I'm done or something like that? And can I go home and be present with my family and stop thinking about work? And if I can't, then I need to do some exploration around that. And can I let people fail and make mistakes without having to pick up the pieces and let them reap the consequences so that we can grow forward? I mean, a lot of what, enabling behavior or codependent behavior is, not allowing other people to make mistakes and reap the consequences, because then you'll feel responsible, but then you end up resenting them for having to take on their responsibilities. So letting that play out and not making everyone else's business your business, and taking care of yourself. Ooh, that's a big one. Taking care of myself, but that's selfish. No, it's not selfish. Can you get your own needs met? You know, can you care for yourself? Can you put yourself as a priority? And it takes a while for people to start changing that pattern to like, I'm allowed to start putting myself first. That sounds really selfish to me. I should feel guilty about that.
Right.
Changing that paradigm where I can put myself first. You know, I put on the mask first and then put on the other, you know, like that whole, you know, analogy with the airplanes thing.
Yes.
It takes a while for people to really get that and to really, but when they do, it's a world of difference. It's just a world of difference.
How do you help people get started? So in other words, everyone knows that cognitively, I know I'm supposed to put the mask on first. Yeah, whatever. Right. They don't actually do it. So now obviously by the time they get to you, they're hopefully already desperate to have something change. So they're motivated, but what kinds of first steps can people take in doing that?
Any kind of change requires small steps at first to test the waters and to see how it works. So I like, for instance, I'll say, so I want you to find one opportunity this week where you would typically take on someone else's role, or where you would typically not say no to them, because even though you want to, even though, you know, you need time and you need rest, but you have trouble saying, I want you to take one situation and I want you to say no, or I want you to let them do it and not take it on. And even if they make a mistake, and while that's happening, whatever's coming up for you, I want you to do some writing, journaling about it. Here's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling really guilty. I feel really selfish. I feel like a jerk, like whatever. Just write it all out, let it all out, and come back to me. Let's talk about it. Don't do anything to assuage your guilt or your thoughts of selfishness. Don't do anything about it. Just let them be there and write them out. And let's talk about it. And like just small stuff. So this is a very small, it's like exposure therapy. It's like a very small, gradual exposure to the thing that gets them the feelings and the thoughts they really don't like and feel uncomfortable about. So they have to like stop them and they have to go do the thing that stops them. And that just perpetuates the whole thing. So slowly exposing yourself to the thing that makes you feel guilty and selfish. And over time, if you keep doing it, your body and nervous system will start to respond to that thing differently and go, oh, actually, this is okay. Actually, I'm not guilty. Actually, I'm not selfish. Yeah. But it takes a while. So it's just slow exposure to it.
And by the way, just such a strong relationship here to physical symptoms, because I've seen people develop an association between certain emotions and their symptoms. So anytime they feel angry, anytime they have a conflict, anytime they feel guilty, they have an automatic response of symptoms. Again, kind of in that Sarno-esque way. I know we've developed more sophisticated ways of explaining it, but Sarno would say that, you know, the dizziness or the symptoms are trying to pull you away from uncomfortable emotions. But in a sense, that really is what I see sometimes, that as soon as that intolerable symptom or the intolerable emotion arises, that people will have a physical symptom. So what you're describing, I talk about this in the free course too, in the context of that section on emotional awareness and expression, that people, you want to actually expose yourself to those emotions exactly for the purpose of teaching your brain it's safe to feel that way sometimes. That's normal.
That's the way that I was able to start sleeping in a bed again, like without feeling dizzy, was I had to expose myself to the thing that made me dizzy, and then do a practice, do a somatic breathing. So I would say the same thing. If you're trying to break enabling behavior or codependent behavior, and you're trying to put your own needs first, and that feels really uncomfortable, try it for 3 days. Try putting your needs first for 3 days. Try doing the thing that makes you feel selfish, that makes you feel guilty. Try doing that for 3 days. And when you start to feel guilty and selfish, you do some breathing, trying to tell yourself messages of safety. I'm okay. It's okay to feel guilty. It's okay. It's okay to feel this way. Like, and just letting yourself tolerate those feelings. That's and then over time, your body starts to recognize that the feeling of guilt is not something to like respond, and you actually stop feeling guilty at some point. Right. It starts going away.
So what do you think of this? I mean, as you're speaking, I was saying to myself, so sometimes I hear people talk about feeling guilty, but then I have other people who say, I'm afraid. they bring up fears.
Yeah.
They're going to fire me. I'm going to lose my job if I start saying no. No one's going to like me. Do you think that these fears are, I hate to use this term, but actual core fears? Like, is that actually what's going on there, or are the fears not really speaking to what the person is actually experiencing? So in other words, are they actually afraid of being fired, or is it often that there's actually something else going on that they're trying to avoid?
I think each person's different. So I think it's a good point. So for instance, if someone feels really deeply guilty, but they're not super aware of that, they might feel fear as a, as a way of like masking the underlying guilt. So they don't get to that feeling underneath. That could be one thing. There are certainly people that feel afraid though. I'm afraid of being abandoned. I'm afraid of being left. I'm afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid of this and that.
So how do they deal with that if they are actually afraid of those things?
Okay, so anytime we're dealing with any emotion that we're trying to manage, number one, it's a matter of making space for it and learning to tolerate it. When we're talking about fear, we're also talking about courage. You have to have some courage to break fear, because those two things are part and parcel. And if you can tolerate your feelings of fear, and I would just like work on a very slow exposure therapy to fear, like letting myself be afraid. And then maybe do some cognitive work around it. Like, okay, what are you afraid of? Okay, if that happens, then what are you afraid of? Okay, if that happens, then what are you afraid of? Like, and you get down to the like, well, then I'll be alone and ashamed and abandoned and broken or something like that. Like the baseline fear. Okay, is that true? Probably not true. Okay, let's manage that. Let's get to that level and see if we can just. I usually do inner child work. Like let's find the child that feels that, and let's see if we can love him and comfort him or comfort her. Right.
Yes.
So let's deal with that part that is so deeply afraid of being abandoned and alone and ashamed. Let's deal with that part. Right. So we could do some of that emotional work. And then on a behavioral level, if we get to the point where they start feeling like, okay, I can kind of manage those parts of me, I can tolerate some of my fear, then I would say, listen, at some point you have to be courageous enough to make a decision that's right for you. And if you're saying that keeping a boundary at work, saying no at work, if those things are going to get you fired, then this is not the right place for you to be working. Why the hell do you want to stay in an environment that's going to be threatening to you if you do what's right for you? You should be in an environment that supports you doing what's right for you. If that's not your company, then go to another company. You know? Like people come to me sometimes, there's an internal and external component to this. People come and say they like one person says, I have a client who's like, I'm so stressed out because my income is less than my expenses. Okay. So let's look at it practically. What are your expenses? What's your income? Okay. Oh, well, here is $3,000 or $4,000 extra that you're paying to your ex-wife that you don't need to. Not legally obligated to do that, but you're doing it. Why? Well, because if I don't, then she'll end up on the street and she'll be homeless and this and that. Okay, so you're willing to sacrifice your own health. You're stressing out every single day so that this imagined idea of her ending up homeless isn't true. So that's all, this projection of enabling and codependence again and stuff like that. Okay. And then so he goes, yeah, but you're not going to talk me out of wanting to do that. It's selfish if I do it. Okay. So got it. So you're coming to me and saying, Jeremy, I've injured myself playing tennis. I go to the tennis court every single day and I'm coming to you and I want you to tell me how to talk myself out of the pain, but I'm still going to go to tennis every day. And my suggestion would be stop playing tennis every day until you're healed. Stop doing the thing that's hurting you every day. This is not just a cognitive thing. This is not just a mental thing. So there's a perception part to it, but there's also behavior. If you're at a workplace and this is not a good space for you, and you've done all the work you can do on your perception, but you've got a boss who's just a bully or a or whatever, why are you there? Start looking for someone else. Let's work on your resume. Let's start putting out resumes, 3 a day. Why are you there? So you have to. There's 2 different components here. We have to start looking at both the internal and the external.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. So, and I want to just clarify with you that I've heard people say, well, My job is just too stressful for me because I have physical symptoms, like they have chronic dizziness symptoms because of other stuff. And then I think sometimes they think that they're trying to set a boundary with work by avoiding doing things that are stressful for them because of the physical symptoms. So do you view that any differently when they're doing it specifically to avoid the physical symptoms?
Well, I think that, I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, but like in terms of avoiding symptoms, it's kind of it's perpetuating them. It's counteracting, again, we have to try to expose ourselves to the things that are triggering us and see if we can work through them, so right. That being said, we have to be discerning, if we are doing something like, listen, if I go into the sun because it triggers me and it gets me feeling dizzy, like, okay, if I'm really interested in being in the sun more, then I have to do something to expose myself to the sun gradually and feel those symptoms and then do some sort of work, whether it's meditation or body tracking or something like that. So I can start to calm myself down in the situation. But the sun's not a dangerous thing mostly. If I said instead, well, I'm going to go expose myself. I'm feeling really afraid when I go into this like really, really dangerous neighborhood. So I don't want to feel afraid anymore. So I'm just going to keep going to the dangerous neighborhood. Right. Well, okay. Now you're making a decision to do something that actually is dangerous. So
right.
So if you're saying I want to avoid this thing at work because of the symptoms, that's an opportunity for you to work through the symptoms. But if if the thing at work is super stressful and dangerous potentially, or threatening or something, then why are you exposing yourself to that?
Right. Right. So differentiating the fact that as awful as the symptoms are, they're not actually dangerous. They are a nervous system error.
Correct.
And therefore you should, again, compassionately, maybe not, full throttle without paying any attention to how you're feeling, but you should be exposing yourself to the things that have previously triggered you.
Yeah, compassionately and gradually.
Compassionately, gradually, not ignoring, not trying to push away, not avoiding symptoms. Like, I'm just going to push through and ignore this, but in a acknowledging, like, no, this is with me, but I'm doing this to help teach my brain that this is okay.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I just wanted to clarify that because I know you mentioned earlier, if someone's truly in a, again, hate to use this word, but a toxic environment that's really not good for them, or their boss is really mean and they need to leave.
And there are some of those for sure.
Absolutely. They should leave, but that's not the same as work prompting symptoms. It's not the same situation. It's on the second, there actually may be something there. If work really is prompting symptoms, there may be something stressing you out at work that you need to work on for sure. But just stopping work and avoiding work for that reason is not a good strategy. I just wanted to make sure you and I are on the same page about that.
Yeah.
To clarify. Okay. Well, great. Okay. Well, this has been a great conversation. I learned a lot. Bear was my favorite part. I'm going to start applying that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use it in my groups because I also have coaching groups. And it's just a wonderful way of looking at how to kind of manage the external piece, but also manage the internal piece at the same time. What other advice do you have for people who are going through conflict at work or who are dealing with stress at work? Anything else that we haven't covered that you wanted to share? I'm sure you could. You could say, I have like 15 hours of footage for that.
Here's something I'll say for conflict in general, whether it's at work or out of work. The opposite of escalated conflict, the types of conflict that stress us out. There's conflicts all the time. They don't stress us out, but they're the types of conflicts that stress us out are escalated conflicts. They trigger our nervous system in some way. The reason we get escalated is because of the perception of threat. The threat could be real or it could just be perceived, but either way, it's a perception of that threat that triggers the nervous system. The opposite of that is care. If we are feeling cared for, and if we care for someone else, there's no threat there. If we're feeling threatened, then there's no care there. That we can't feel cared for and threatened by someone at the same time. They're two opposites. So in terms of conflict, if you want to get along with people better, or whoever, they need to know that you really care about them. You could look at this from from a larger group perspective to an interpersonal perspective. If you met someone who you deeply disagreed with from a value perspective or something like that, and you said, Like the whole fear-based conflict is all about, they don't care about you. They want to get you, or they don't care about your values. They don't care about your goals. If you met someone who you thought, boy, like, I'm a Democrat and this person's a Republican, and all I've heard was Republicans want to, destroy democracy, or all I've heard is Democrats want to destroy democracy. And you sit down with that person, and this person said to you, the bottom line is, I actually really care about you. And I care about your family, and you believed them. It was honest. You believe them. I care about you. I care about your family. I want what's best for you. And all these things that I'm saying, that my perspective, it's just because I believe those are the best ways to get there. And we differ on the ways to get there. But I want what you want. I care about you. If that's relayed, then conflict kind of goes away, and now it's just a problem solving, like a strategy thing, So if you have a conflict with someone and you don't want conflict, do whatever you can do to make sure they know that you care about them, and start trying to figure out how you can feel more cared for by the people that you don't want conflict with. Care is the antidote. You just tied in so many things at once that I just have to highlight and echo back some of the things that you said. So first of all, I've always said to folks, if you want to change someone's mind, you don't come in attacking them. It's just not going to happen. If you and I disagree on some hot political topic, and I'm like, just by the way, before I try to change your mind, you're stupid and I hate your opinion. It's not going to work. So, but you can apply that to yourself too. If your fear about symptoms, or your stress about a work situation, if that's coming at you hot on the inside, and you turn to it and say, go away, I hate you, and you don't feel that way, it's not gonna go anywhere. But if you can be a little more open to it and say, hey, I'm a little curious about your point of view, even if it's not like full on caring, even if it's just a little curiosity, you are much more likely to open the door to actual change on the inside and on the outside, first of all. But as soon as you were talking, I was thinking polyvagal theory. And because you were saying connection being the antidote in a way to fight or flight, right? So again, whether polyvagal theory is correct or not, the idea that you can't be in both a fight or flight state and a connected state at the same time, that they're opposite to each other. So we co-regulate when you are in a connected state and you're coming to someone in a connected state, you're going to pull them into the connected state as well, which is going to pull them out of that fight, flight, militant, aggressive, or passive aggressive state as well. So you can harness, you have agency, you have more agency if you harness your own nervous system, and you can kind of pull them along with you if you approach a situation from that perspective. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're getting people's basic needs met. I mean, everybody wants to be cared for, right? It's like one of our most basic needs. Some needs theories call it affiliation, some call it belonging, relatedness, but feeling cared for by someone is one of our absolute basic needs. If you can get that met, you can really you can just counteract the feeling of threat from each other. Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Thank you, Jeremy. This is awesome. I think this is just going to be so helpful for people to hear. And you outlined such actionable goals. And again, I think we made it very, very clear why everyone should care about the topic of workplace stress, because it's not workplace stress. It's interpersonal stress in general that we were talking about today. Yeah. And by the way, I'll say one more thing about the care piece. So you brought this up. Yes. On the internal piece, if you're not taking care of your own needs, then you're not caring for yourself. You're essentially being a threat to yourself. So caring not just for other people, but caring for yourself, being gentle, being compassionate, being caring for yourself is a huge difference. So don't beat yourself up. Absolutely. Amen to that too. One of the primary messages of my channel, like just stop being a jerk to yourself. If you can stop doing that, that will go a long way. Yes, right? Absolutely. But sometimes you being so kind to other people is you also being a jerk to yourself. So 100%. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time today. This has been awesome. And I will include the details of your company in the video description. So if anyone's interested in taking a further look at what you do, they can learn more about you on your website. And again, just what a special opportunity for someone who's gone through chronic dizziness to come and share also so much wisdom about this other topic as well. Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on. This was fun and interesting, and it was a good chance for me to vent about my about my experience.
Yeah, yeah, amen. Well, again, it's going to land very well. The people who are going to watch this are going to relate to everything that you said.
Oh, good. Well, hopefully it's helpful.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Have a good one.